You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, we are very excited today for our guest who had an incredible coaching career with the Knicks and the Rockets, and now you see him as the lead color commentator for ESPN basketball broadcasts.
Absolutely. He's somewhat of a New York legend and somebody who we were able to get on this podcast on short notice. So we're really, really excited to have him on, and it's an honor, to be quite honest. Jeff Van Gundy. Jeff, good morning. Welcome to the show. And how are you doing today?
Good, guys. How are you?
We're doing well. Watching sports back has been great, and we're happy to see you back on the air. And we're going to touch on how things have changed for you. But first, I wanted to start with your childhood. Obviously, you and your brother grew up playing basketball. You were a very accomplished point guard in Rochester. When did you make the decision that you wanted to pursue a career in coaching?
Well, my dad was a coach, and so when you're around basketball, he coached different colleges. You get to go to practice, hang out, look like a heck of a time, so for a kid like myself. So yeah, I think I knew pretty early on I wanted to do that. You never know what level you're going to coach at, but just coach and you enjoy it and you enjoy the players. And so I was really fortunate.
How was the compete level when you were younger with your brother? Because you and Stan, it's a very interesting scenario here. Not many brother duos, quite frankly, have as much success doing what they do at a professional level. I think it's very super rare. So what was the compete level like for you and your brother when you were younger? And how did you help each other navigate your career paths up until the NBA and up until today?
Yeah, so I think I was 3 grades behind him. So, we really never competed in sports against each other, never played with him on a team. But as far as in the coaching aspect, so much of coaching is people getting you in front of coaches so that your maybe talents can show. And so I think my dad and my brother, they were my network basically of people that I ended up knowing. And so I got to Providence College. Stan, then, I worked for a guy, Stu Jackson at the Knicks, was my first head coach at the Knicks. Stan ended up working for him at the University of Wisconsin, and then Stan became the Wisconsin head coach. And then I worked for Coach Riley, and then Stan worked for Coach Riley. So a lot of our stuff has overlapped because we've known similar people.
Yeah, no doubt about it. The same network, the same circle there. Now, you mentioned you're getting your first college coaching job after you coached in high school at McQuaid Jesuit High School, and then you became the graduate assistant under Rick Pitino, who's now with Iona at Providence College. So how did that opportunity come about for you? Was it just because he was in your network, or how did you get that job?
No, see, my year I was coaching in high school, I had a terrific player who was a sophomore named Greg Woodard, and Providence was coming through, Herb Sendek and Stu Jackson were coming through Rochester to visit upperclassmen, but they also stopped in to see me about, Woodard on their way through town. We talked. Eventually, they asked if I'd be interested in applying for the graduate assistant job at Providence. I did. Stu had a big part in deciding who got that job. So fortunately, I got hired in that job. And then, again, fortunately, when he went to the Knicks with Coach Pitino, and Coach Pitino then left to go to Kentucky and Stu got that job, I was able to come on with him at the Knicks and get my start in the NBA.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You're then there with the Knicks, raising career there with the Knicks, one of the most successful coaches we've ever seen in New York. Now, you've done countless NBA finals and countless broadcasts now, but is there anything like the crowd and the noise in Madison Square Garden when there's a big playoff game?
No, Madison Square Garden in and of itself, everybody says they have the best fans and, we have the best arena. And we all know it's BS because it is Madison Square Garden and those fans are there basically whether they have a great team or a bad team, and they're invested in that game. And so when they used to have the tunnel at the Garden, and I'm sad to say that they don't anymore, but when that tunnel was there and you would walk out of the tunnel, it gave you chills every single night you did that as a coach, assistant, head coach, it didn't matter because you knew you were going out and it was going to be an incredible battle. So nothing like it.
So I want to take you back to when you first started getting the Knicks job. You started under Stu Jackson, right? What was it like working for all the great coaches who came in and around New York? We've heard amazing stories, mob-like stories, if you will, about Pat Riley. And a lot of people hold Pat Riley as royalty, which obviously makes sense. The great Don Nelson. So what was it like being able to learn from those people, being around those people? What did they teach you about the game or maybe even about life itself that have taken you to where you are now?
So I was really fortunate. I got to work for Stu, John McLeod, Pat Riley, and Don Nelson. And three of those four guys won over 700 games in the NBA. And so their experiences were deep and varied. And the personalities of those guys could not have been any different. And I think what you learn early on is you take from everybody, but you don't try to change your personality to be somebody you're not. I think from Coach Riley, the attention to detail, the preparation, knowing exactly what wins and what loses. Coach Nelson, the ability to be unconventional and not be afraid to try something that may be mocked, but if you think it's best to do it. John McLeod was so very, such a gentleman, an intense competitor, but a gentleman, and then Stu has had all these experiences, college head coach, NBA head coach, general manager of a team. And so from him, he was young, and that gave me a window when I got the Knick job as a young coach, some of the things and obstacles you were going to run into.
So what is pretty unique is you're there as an assistant for 6 years with 4 different coaches. Now, were there times there where you thought, okay, maybe this guy's got to come in and wants his whole new regime? And how did you manage to stay around with all different coaches?
Yeah, a lot of things in coaching is good fortune and good timing. So Stu brought me in. He was fired in season. So when they brought John McLeod in, he kept the staff, which is typical in season. Then he left to go to Notre Dame after that season, and Coach Riley came in. Now you would think Pat Riley would have his staff, but Mike Dunleavy had kept Pat's staff when he had taken over the Lakers, and they had been successful. So Pat didn't, those guys decided to stay in LA. And so Pat had people he was going to hire, and he fortunately kept myself and Paul Silas and added Dick Carter. And these were back before these staffs have become, so unwieldy, where they're so huge. So I was fortunate there. And then when Coach Riley left the Knicks to go to Miami, he asked for permission for me to go with him. They did not give that permission. And so Coach Nelson, kept me on board. And then after that, I became the head coach. So, I had really good fortune, incredible timing that the Lakers staff didn't come with Coach Riley. Anybody who thinks that a lot of their success in life isn't tied to luck would be underestimating the value we've all had of good fortune in our lives.
So, since we were talking about coaches here, I want to bring this in now. Obviously, the current Knicks head coach is Tom Thibodeau. And from what we've seen, Nick and I, and from what everybody's seen, our vantage point, it seems like the culture and the identity of the Knicks right now at this point is slowly changing. Now, a lot of fans always wanted to go back to the way it was in the 90s. Very, very defense first mentality, really, really tough Knicks teams. I'm going to bring up players and we're going to talk about players afterwards. But Tibbs has a connection to the Knicks like everybody else, it seems. So what is your close connection with Tibbs? When he got the job or when he was interviewing for the job, did he reach out to you in any way? Do you know of anybody else that he reached out to anyway? And what do you think of the job he's doing so far in New York?
Well, yeah, I was really fortunate. I worked with Tom at the Knicks for I think 4 or 5 years, and then in Houston for another 4 years. And he's an elite NBA head coach. So I thought it was an inspired choice by Leon Rose. Leon knew him because he was his agent prior to Leon starting to run the Knicks. And so I think he had insight into just how good Tom was at getting the maximum out of individuals and teams. And you never want to go backwards, but you don't want to try to play a 90s game in the, this era. But a lot of those things that the Knicks team stood for back then are applicable today. Toughness, unselfishness, intensity, preparation, all those things that go directly to winning. And I think Tom does an outstanding job of a modern day approach with old school values. And I think that their 7-8, as we talk today, is one of the great accomplishments because they have lower end NBA talent, particularly offensively. They're very, very limited offensively from a talent standpoint for the NBA. And so what they've been able to accomplish, I give a lot of credit to those players and to Tom and his staff.
Well, to compensate, they have the number one defense as we speak. And I think that is a testament to Tom, what he's able to do. Since we talk about offensive talent, of the players on the roster right now, I just want to chime in quick. Who do you think could be a potential top 3-4 piece for this team moving forward? We know Julius Randle's had a good start to the season. I think RJ Barrett has some promise, but still has a lot of work to do regarding three-point shooting and his shot at the free throw line. Manuel quickly has looked very, very solid. He was drafted in the 25th overall. So to get a potential rotation player at that juncture for this staff so far is promising. So do you think any of those guys have the potential to be here 2-3 years down the line?
Sure. I think so much is tied to shooting now. When you see a player make a jump, it's usually because he becomes more efficient as a shooter. And so Randle, if he becomes more efficient, he could be a keeper because we've seen like his ability to draw the second defender now. He's a much more willing passer this year. I give him a lot of credit to adding that component to his game. RJ Barrett, if he's to be a good NBA starter, he's going to have to shoot the ball better from three, from the free throw line. There's just a lot that you have to, there's a lot there. I don't know if he will improve. You don't usually go from a below average shooter to a really, upper echelon shooter, but he can make improvements. Some of that will be shot selection too. I think he takes generally very good shots. So that's good. And then quickly, like you said, to me, when you can draft somebody 25 and he knows how to play on offense like he does. Like Quickly has a good feel offensively. Got a bunch of different shots in the paint, the floaters. He knows how to get fouled and get to the free throw line, and he can make threes. So that's a heck of a pick. I wasn't familiar with him prior to the draft, but very impressed in his brief run so far with the Knicks.
It's been over 2 decades since the Knicks have re-signed one of their initial draft picks. So hopefully that starts changing, because I think it's important to be able to build a roster from the draft. But Jeff, does it surprise you at all that despite the fact that the Nets are leading, Sports Center each night, a national story, that more people in New York are interested to know if Emmanuel Quickley is going to become the starting point guard than they are about the Nets?
No, that doesn't surprise me. I coached there for 13 years. So, the Nets then were in New Jersey, and they had good teams, Chuck Daly teams. And then obviously after I left, they had the Jason Kidd teams, went to the finals in back-to-back years. And now the Nets have this super team. But if anybody ever thinks New York City is going to follow the Nets more than the Knicks, that's nuts. It's a Knicks town. Hey, Brooklyn is a Knicks borough. Like, do they have diehard fans in Brooklyn? Yeah. Do the Knicks have generational fans? Like, when it's that fandom has been passed down from, parents to, children to, and on and on and on. This Knicks fans, like, that's not changing. Think about it. They haven't been even that good over the past, 20 years, whatever it may be. But has Knicks fandom waned? I would say not one bit. Everybody always says I'm done with the Knicks, when they've struggled, right? And guess what? Myself included, I'm right back the next year, following every box score,
right,
watching as many games as I can. And so I think you can appreciate how good the Nets have done and the team they've assembled and enjoy watching them. But that doesn't mean you're changing from a Knicks fan to a Net fan.
Right. And like you mentioned, during normal times, there's not an empty seat in Madison Square Garden for our next game.
No, it's unbelievable. And they're into it. Like, it could be, a February game where they're, not even involved in the playoff chase. But when you walk into that arena, that crowd on that given night, they're into the game.
So you are now doing games essentially remote because the pandemic has hit everybody very, very hard and kind of adjusted what production is on the fly. So talk to us about the challenges of doing that stuff. We've had guests on in the past. We've had a lot of beat reporters on recently. A lot of them I've had to do a lot more stuff with changing to Zoom calls. Kind of harder to do stuff remote, but no travel. A lot of people are staying home with their family, able to do stuff from home. So how has the pandemic changed what you do on a day-to-day basis and how you guys prepare to produce NBA games?
So the only travel I'm doing right now is for the ABC games, like the Saturday night. So I traveled for Christmas. We did a game in LA. I travel at the end of the month to Boston for a Laker-Boston game. But the ESPN games, some are done on site, but my games have been all remote. And it's been, interesting from the fact about how convenient it is. And I'm amazed at the technology that they can get people to set this up so that it can work. I've watched games where it's been done remote, and I can't tell at all. Like Kirk Herbstreit did the national championship game, college football remotely. I would have never known. I thought he was there. So I think the quality of the technology is good. The one negative is that you can't play off of your partner. Like, you could used to get eye contact with them about you had something to say. There's a little bit of a delay. So sometimes I've stepped on my partner, thinking he was done and he wasn't. But for the most part, the peace of mind ESPN has allowed us by allowing us to do these games remotely has been well worth whatever minor inconveniences there are from a broadcast standpoint.
So since we're talking about ESPN here, after your coaching career with the Rockets, you end up doing a game for ESPN, and it led to a full-time opportunity there. How did that whole scenario come about for you? And did you ever think about potentially going into broadcasting, or is it something that kind of just happened?
Well, when I left the Knicks, the year between me leaving the Knicks and going to Houston, I broadcast for TNT, and I worked with Marv Albert and Mike Fratello. And Marv was instrumental in getting me that opportunity. And the funny thing to me was, even though Marv broadcast our games with the Knicks, it wasn't like we had a tight relationship. Marv was old school broadcasting, where he did it like he does network games, right down the middle. And so I got that opportunity. I liked it. I liked working with them. They included me when they didn't have to. So it was fantastic. But a guy by the name of Mike Pearl, who was at TNT when I did that year, had then switched over to ABC and ESPN by the time, 5 years later, and I had been let go by the Rockets. And so he got me the initial opportunity to do a playoff game, and I did it with Mike Breen and John Barry, and then I stayed for the rest of the playoffs, not knowing if there was going to be more opportunity in the following year. There was, and so Mike Pearl, to me, he went to bat for me. He fought to get me an opportunity, and I'll forever be in his debt because of that.
Knicks fans are very fortunate. They have two of the best play-by-play guys of all time for basketball. They go from Marv Albert to Mike Breen, and the fill-in guy is Kenny Albert, who is amazing as well. That's just, quite the legacy there for Knicks broadcasters. But you've been able to work with Marv. Now you, of course, work with Mike Breen and Jackson all the time. How is it just being up close and personal? How much easier does Mike Breen make your job?
Well, Mike is like a great point guard. And we're like, Jack and I are like spot up shooters in the corner, where, he gets in the lane, he does all the hard work, and then he kicks it out to us for a spot up three. He's that good. Those guys make what's hard look easy. Anybody great at their job makes what is really difficult and challenging appear to be something much simpler than it is. And Marv, for that matter, those type of guys, broadcasters, they're just incredible the way they can weave stories, make sure that they use your knowledge. And the other thing I think is incredibly important is, like, when you feel comfortable, like I knew Mike forever because he was, the Knick broadcaster, first radio, and then did the TV. And then I coached Mark 3 different times. So the friendship, and then our stats guy, Dave Freed, he's another guy you should have on this thing. Like, he makes all of it come together with his constant information that he feeds all of us, sort of the unsung hero. So yeah, we're really fortunate. We got a great group. And really, those are Saturday night. Other than that, I don't work with those guys very often in the regular season. It sort of comes together on the Saturday night games and then in the playoffs. But we're fortunate at ESPN. There's such a deep roster of greatness in play-by-play announcers. It's fun actually to switch it up and get to work with Dave Pash and Ryan Rucco and Mark Jones. So yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, I always enjoyed when I think you and the college crew switch too, and Dick Vitale does the NBA, and you guys do some college. Those are always fun.
That. Yeah, I like that very much. I like the intensity, passion, and enthusiasm that surrounds college basketball.
Yeah, and real quick here, since you were an assistant coach with Rutgers, how do you think about their resurgence here as a basketball program, a top 25 team?
Steve Pikiell has done an amazing job. Like Rutgers basketball, the year I was there, we went to the NCAA tournament. We were in the Atlantic 10, which I thought was the perfect league for Rutgers. And then when they went to the Big East, it was hard. It was hard recruiting. So many of the best players in New Jersey left the state. PJ Carlissimo had done a great job in New York, so they had it rolling. So it was rough in the Big East. And then when they went to the Big Ten, I thought it was even going to be worse because they have, this great historic league. They were this sort of, other team that had gotten put into it. And so what he is able to do now on a consistent basis to attract talent, to coach them up, and now they have Schiano back in football. I think Rutgers athletics, which had long been sort of an afterthought, is now exciting. And there's no doubt Rutgers would have made the NCAA tournament last year had the tournament not been called off. I think most assuredly they'll make it this year. And for some programs, that's just expected. At Rutgers, that's an incredible accomplishment.
Yeah, I think with Pikiell and Schiano now for Rutgers, they'll both be consistent top 25 teams for years to come. And hopefully they can, like you said, capitalize on recruiting locally and having people not want to leave the states to go to bigger schools, because the Big Ten, it's as big of a conference as you get. Back to when you're broadcasting here when you first started, how long did it take you to get used to having, the statistician in your ear, producer, director, plus having to watch the game and talking to your broadcast colleagues?
Well, I think that's where the brilliance of producers are, just like, they're not seen, but like Tim Corrigan, who runs basketball for ESPN, is also the lead producer. And, he doesn't talk in my ear very often. Like he'll say something, but he doesn't talk when I talk. He's not like, he can be with Mike and like, basically tell him a story. If he says 2 words to me, he knows I'm going to stop talking and start listening. So I don't have that ability like they do, but producers are so important to the flow of the game and also giving you the leeway to say what you think instead of, prepackaged, like you always have to agree with each other, a call on the floor, the league office. So, we're fortunate there that, from a production standpoint, we get to say what we want. And for the most part, there are a few times they, wrap you across the knuckles, but for the most part, we get to say what we want.
Yeah, I think that's what's so great about you and Mark Jackson together. You guys very outspoken when you have to be. Now, I remember very fondly where Mark Jackson gets the coaching job with the Golden State Warriors. You and Mike double dip. You do 2 games that day because you wanted to make sure you were there to do his first game. Thought that was a tremendous gesture by you guys. However, I think it's a great travesty right now that Mark Jackson is not a coach in the NBA, because I think, and maybe you differ here, but I think without him, that Warriors dynasty would never initially took off.
Well, Mark did a great job in Golden State. People try to compare Golden State after him to Golden State with him, but they never look at the rosters. Just put up the rosters. What Mark had is he had a very, very young Draymond Green, and then he sort of let Curry and Thompson go and develop into this dynamic backcourt. And Mark did a great job in instilling in them the value of defense. The Warriors had historically been an offensive-oriented organization, but what Mark brought in to couple with Curry and Thompson's great shooting was an every night defensive mentality that I think as their roster improved after Mark left, that defense, held. And I think Steve Kerr showed great class along their championship years of continuing to credit Mark for his what he accomplished there and what he instilled there and how important that was to their championship run. I agree with you. There's something up that Mark's not a head coach in this NBA. I don't know what that is. I have my suspicions, but there's obviously something up because there's not more qualified people. He is an unbelievable leader of people. He has great feel, just like he did as a player. And so if you said an 18-year basketball career, incredible broadcasting career, terrific turnaround job with the Warriors to position themselves to become a championship level team, why has he not ever gotten a second opportunity? It baffles you. It really does. And it baffles me. And there's something up. And I wish someone would take a deep dive into what that is.
Yeah, and I'm a St. John's alumni, and I was shocked that once again they passed over him 2 years ago to be the head coach. Maybe he doesn't want to do college, which is understandable. And your guy, Patrick Ewing, who you coached, he also had a lot of issues just getting a head coaching job. He was an assistant for so many years in the NBA. Obviously, he's now at Georgetown, but do you think he'll ever see him get an opportunity at the NBA level?
Yeah, I think he's really happy at Georgetown, and obviously they've got to win more. They've had some issues with some transfers, but they've got a great recruiting class coming in. But you're right. Even with Patrick, right? A top 50 all-time player. No top 50 player then goes and becomes an assistant for 15 years. Think about it. Yeah. Like he was this all-time great, and then he devoted the next decade and a half to becoming the best possible coach he could become. That perseverance, that passion, that persistence, I believe is incredible, and it's an incredible lesson. And so I was happy for him at Georgetown that he didn't get many interviews for NBA jobs. Never made sense to me because we worked together not only as coach and player, but as coaches that work together on our staff in Houston. So I saw how much he improved, how much he put into it, and really happy that he got the opportunity at Georgetown, but never could understand why more NBA teams weren't interested.
So now that we're on the topic of coaches, I want to, and Patrick Ewing, I want to specifically reference players transitioning to coaching, because Nick mentioned he's a St. John's grad. Recently, we saw Chris Mullin try to go there, resuscitate the program. I don't think he was totally bad necessarily, but ultimately it didn't pan out. And we've seen players in recent years try to transition and become NBA head coaches. And because you have experience at point guard, I'm going to list two off the top of my head: Derek Fisher and Jason Kidd. Derek Fisher went to the Knicks. Now, there were issues there with Phil Jackson and trying to implement the triangle. And we had Mark Berman on, obviously, and he referenced, I believe, that Fisher just did not have any interest in coaching the triangle. So whether that played a factor into it, we don't know. Jason Kidd has had varying degrees. I mean, he's won some games. Has he been a good NBA coach necessarily? I don't think so. So for players who have an interest in going and doing coaching after their career is over, whether they do it at the collegiate level, whether they do it at the professional level, you have very close ties to Mark Jackson, and you've seen his success at the NBA level. He was a 50-win head coach, and I do believe he's going to get another job, and I agree with Nick and you in that sense that he should get another job. But for those players who are looking to transition to that next stage of their careers where they want to give back and be a coach at either the collegiate or professional levels, what would your advice be to them to ease that transition and make it a more efficient one?
Well, first, I think a lot of your success in coaching is based on the players at hand, right? So I know when I took over with the Knicks, I could make a number of mistakes in a game, but because I had Ewing and Oakley and, great players, they covered up the mistakes so you could still win and make mistakes and learn. So having great players is incredibly important. And again, any coach who tries to tell you it's their system and not the players, that's foolish. Don't believe them. I think secondly, though, as you play, uh, jot down, keep notebooks filled with what you believe in from all your coaches and what you want to do differently. Um, I think that's incredibly important. I think Steve Kerr did that. After his career, he was a broadcaster, general manager, but he started really writing out his philosophy of what he wanted to do, how he wanted to conduct their business or their culture. And he adopted many things that he saw Pete Carroll do. So he went up and he visited practice up there. And I think that's also incredibly important, is to get to as many practices at different levels and see how different people teach, coach, encourage, criticize, whatever it may be, because it gives you a better feel how you want to do it. So I think the team, the coaches who are best able to go from being terrific players to outstanding coaches are one that invest the time in it. And I think really nail down what they believe in and what they want to stand for.
I'll make this quick. I know you might be a little bit biased. Do you think a certain position translates better to the sideline as a coach?
What do you mean by that?
Do you think a player who is a lead guard or a point guard in the NBA, or somebody who, like, maybe even like a Draymond Green now, who's kind of blended and made the front court position much more versatile than what we saw when you were coaching back in your heyday? So do you think any position in particular would translate better, or do you think it's just a case-by-case individual basis?
Well, I think it depends, I think there was a bias towards point guards, thinking that they had a better feel for the offensive game. But, if you have a really good defensive team, usually it's keyed by, a big guy who can communicate coverages and schemes and all that, which Ewing did, Oakley did for us. So I think that bias may be going away a little bit. I think Monty Williams at Phoenix, who I coached in New York, there's no one brighter than him. So I think a lot of the stereotypes that used to exist are getting knocked down now, thankfully, by the younger leaders in sport, but also just throughout our society. I think a lot of these, myths that we always, allowed to occur don't occur as much in sport. And I think it's a good thing.
Now, you mentioned that the roster plays a key factor in a coach's success. And obviously that makes total sense. Sometimes if you don't have the talent, it's hard to do anything. And injuries play a major role. So you, of course, with the Rockets had two of the best players in the league, Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady. And unfortunately, due to injuries, we never really got to see their full potential together. But you were there with Yao, and you saw him in practice and you saw him in games. Just how great really was he? And what did he do for the game as a whole, particularly bringing the audience to China?
Well, I don't think it can be underestimated, his impact on how much the Chinese people love NBA basketball. Yao was the singular hardest working, most dedicated athlete I ever coached. And he was absolutely the most unselfish guy when it came to personal numbers. Like he genuinely was as happy for other people, other players' success as he was for his own. So he had great pride and great drive to become a great player, and yet the unselfishness and humility to be happy for others. That is rare in any occupation and most rare in professional sports. So Yao going into the Hall of Fame, people said, well, he didn't play long enough because of injuries. But when he did play, he was an absolute star. At that time, Shaq was clearly the best center. Then it was Yao, and then Dwight Howard. And Yao was closer to Shaq than Dwight Howard was to Yao.
Yeah, no doubt about it. It was great to see the two of them battle, and everybody in China is just a huge Houston Rockets fan at this point. It's all thanks to Yao. Now, in 2017, you dust off the whistle and you become the national team coach for USA. What an honor was that for you to be able to represent your country, and any trepidations at all, considering that you hadn't coached in the last 9 or 10 years?
Not really. I think the national team coaching, Greg Popovich and Sean Ford, who was in charge of USA basketball, when they asked you to do it, it was a terrific surprise, but also a great honor. And what you had to do was try to get up to speed on international basketball, not only the personnel, but also how the game was played, different rules, all of that. And it was really an incredible experience all the way through the World Cup last fall, or the previous fall, before, the pandemic took us out of the Olympics last year. So it just was a great honor. And to get to work for Pop and for Sean. And the best part of it all, though, besides representing the country, was getting to work with the G League player. When I was an NBA head coach, the G League, again, was viewed differently. It was a place of punishment and purgatory. You sent players down if they weren't doing what you wanted them to do at the NBA level. Now the league is used so much better. It's so much better thought of, so much better, well run. And the G League players are so good at what they do, and yet they're sitting just outside of the pot of gold, right? So a G League player makes like 35 to 50,000. An NBA, the last guy in the league, makes what, 430, 450,000 at minimum. So to try to help them or coach them to try to win those very important international contests, and at the same time try to help their careers by telling NBA coaches about these guys, that was something that I didn't think would ever happen, and I'm so grateful that it did, because truly an honor of a lifetime.
Yeah, and I hate to mention the Nets again, but I think one of the first guys now that you think of who was a kind of G League success story is unfortunately Spencer Dinwiddie, who's now hurt, but he's had a tremendous impact on that team in the past couple of years. I think you're 100% right. I think the way that the league uses that as more of a developmental system now, you're seeing more players now more than ever getting the opportunity to come up to make NBA rosters. A lot of them are making NBA rotations now. So I think you're 100% on the money there. Throughout your entire career in coaching, is there one particular example of a player who came to you at the very beginning or was very raw when you first arrived at whatever destination you were at, and that you saw that player's growth more so than anybody else as like a success story like Spencer?
Yeah, we had a guy in Houston named Chuck Hayes, undrafted, spent some time in the G League, came to us, couldn't shoot at all, like outside of a layup. And, he's an undersized 4-man from Kentucky. But as you watched him, he just knew how to make the right play at both ends, and smart and tough and sound. So to see him come from undrafted, I think he played 15 years in the NBA. It was awesome. And now he's a scout for the Rockets. And so Yeah, I that to me was the one that came out of nowhere. This undrafted guy, and I think another one was Scott Brooks, who was the coach of the Wizards, and we had him with the Knicks, and he just bounced around, but because of his tenacity and his shooting and his sense of team, he had a great spirit about him. You know, he played on championship teams in Houston. He played with us, and he stayed in the league longer than his talents should have allowed him to. But through his work and his sense of team, he had an incredible NBA career.
Since we're talking about undrafted guys who made an impact, what was it like broadcasting in the time period that was Linsanity?
You know what's interesting about that is Mike did all those games and I watched, but I never did a Jeremy Lin Knick game that I remember. I'll say this though, he was a good NBA player when he was in the NBA, but for those 2 weeks, there was no one. I mean, it's hard to reach that level in a 2-week period.
Yeah.
That he and also to capture. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say he captured the NBA and New York City like other great players have not been able to do, and an incredible run, and just the magnitude of it for that time period was amazing.
Yeah, I
It was
think
inspiring too. That more so than anything else. I think people watched somebody like Jeremy Lin come in, and obviously you don't want to say anything regarding Asians, but I mean, he's the very first, I think, Asian player who came off the grid like that and was able to do the tremendous things that he did. And it really woke up people, I think, to the fact like, whoa, like, look at this guy, how talented he is. If he can do this and he can inspire, and at that time, the Knicks were still kind of a middling team. They were starting to turn the corner, but they were still, the reputation had not, come back fully yet. So people were saying to themselves, oh, Jeremy Lin could do this with the Knicks. And no, I think you're 100% right. I think it was an inspiration. I think everybody always remembers that time pretty fondly.
yeah, and Mike Breen had one of his best ever bangs, Valentine's Day up in Toronto, and Jeremy Lin hits the game winner, and that was just an incredible one. But overall, in your time here as a broadcaster, what has been your favorite, era or team to cover? Obviously, you had the Heat big three, you had the Warriors, you have the Spurs, and of course the Lakers. And the Celtics had the year as well. But which team or era there was your favorite to cover?
Yeah, I think I really enjoyed the Spurs, that back-to-back where they played Miami 2 straight years in the finals. I thought that was really good basketball to watch. I loved the Boston team that got put together. And again, I knew people there, having Coach Doc Rivers, worked with Tom Thibodeau and Michael Longobardi, who were on his staff. So, that I think that was a cool era for me too. Plus, the Boston Garden is, or TD, whatever they call that thing now. But Boston basketball is similar to the Knicks, that they can be great or they can be bad or anywhere in between, but fans care and they know the game and they appreciate good basketball. And so to see them just a couple years before in Boston, they lost 18 straight games, to a year and a half later, them winning it all. That was fun to watch.
So I want to ask you about one game in particular, because I really significantly hold this game in high regard, and it's very, very tough, I think, to maybe go back in time and put this game maybe above the great Celtics-Lakers games from the 80s, maybe some of the Bulls-Jazz games from those 2 straight finals in the 90s. But I want to take you back to Game 7, 2016 Cavs-Warriors, because I think the implications of that game, all the history surrounding that game, the Warriors' 73-win season, they win that game. They officially facto become the best team ever, even though I'm sure the 96 Bulls would all have something to say about that if they would have the chance to be put in a time machine and play, each other on the court. But Cavs, Cleveland, the whole story with LeBron going home, the history behind the potential of the Warriors being the best team ever. I think for my money, I think it's the best Game 7 in NBA history. I really do. The game was within 2 or 3 possessions throughout the whole game. You had the big shot with Kyrie Irving at the end. You had the big block in transition with LeBron, Andre Iguodala. Where would you put that particular game, among the all-time great NBA games?
Well, it was. It starts with in Game 5 with the Draymond Green, love tap that got him suspended. Or was that was that Game 5? 4, maybe. 5. So he gets suspended, right? No. Anyway, whenever it happened, that had a huge impact. Down 3-1 to come back and put yourself in position, have to win 2 on the road. And so the Game 5 win, I think people were like, yeah, I understand it. Game 6, sort of expected, right? Cleveland back at home. But Game 7, I think everybody expected the Warriors to take care of business. The funny part is Draymond Green played an incredible Game 7.
He did.
And
the best player on the court for the Warriors.
Yeah, and what's amazing about that is you never see them lose when he's great like that, because you just count on those other guys. But the sequence at the end of the shot, the block, and then Kevin Love's stop against Curry after he had to switch on to him, those 3 things are iconic. And so I don't know. I don't really rank things like that, but being there, that was incredible competition at its highest level.
Yeah, people always forget what a good job on the switch Kevin Love did guarding Steph Curry at the end of the game.
It really was amazing. And that's not obviously Love's forte. He doesn't have great lateral quickness and he's not a good defender, but in that short period of time, that one stop, he got it done.
Yeah, I also think you seeing LeBron on the sideline doing the iconic, like, we need one stop and we got this. Everything about that game, honestly, like I said, I hold that game in high regard. It's, I think, by far, I think the best game that I've ever watched. Unfortunately, ever since you left the Knicks. But I want to take you back in time to when you were the coach of the Knicks, because I want us to talk about specific players. And you mentioned Ewing and Oakley before. You got to coach a bunch of really great players during your tenure there. Charlie Ward, Allen Houston, Latrell Sprewell, Marcus Camby, who I want to ask you a follow-up question right after that. But out of those guys or anybody else in particular, who was your favorite player that you got to coach when you were here with the Knicks? And who were some of your favorite people who surrounded you during your time here?
Well, you named like those guys. One that you mentioned that you didn't mention was
Larry Johnson.
And Larry Johnson was one of the greatest teammates I've ever seen. Larry came to us from Charlotte, and all he cared about, a lot of people say all I care about is winning, but what they fail to say is if I get my own way. Larry was just the opposite. All he did care about was winning. He'd fit in. He could get 20 one night, and if you decided to go a different direction the next game and the ball found other people or his minutes were diminished, he was all about what was good for the group. So I think Charlie Ward, because he was like a low draft choice in the first round, his improvement from day one and season one through his time of starting in the NBA Finals was dramatic and incredible. Without Ewing, Oakley, and Mark Jackson, when I first came to the Knicks as an assistant, they respected the position of the coach, like myself. But I didn't. I hadn't done anything. You know, they were so helpful. I learned more from them than I taught them. They taught me NBA basketball along with the other coaches I worked for. Allen Houston, I think, was one of the most underrated NBA scorers that ever played. No, like he was unguardable in his pull-up game. He was big. He was strong. He could get to a spot, and he was gonna make. Sprewell was as dynamic of and was such a much needed jolt of energy and passion that we needed, and a terrific competitor. And the thing I appreciated about Sprewell was if you asked him a question, he gave you an honest answer versus giving you an answer that maybe he was expected to give. But then there's guys like you mentioned, Camby, Kurt Thomas, incredible competitor. Dudley, Buck Williams, Chris Childs. I mean, I know I'm forgetting people, but I loved the end of the guys who weren't in the rotation: Scott Brooks, Rick Brunson, Herb. I mentioned maybe Herb Williams if I hadn't mentioned before. Like those teams and those players and those people all had such a dramatic impact on my life, our success with the Knicks. And even though you're not in daily contact with them anymore, you'll be forever tied to them because of those great years.
When it came to Charlie Ward, did you ever think you'd be coaching a Heisman Trophy winner?
Well, the great part about coaching Charlie was he was a silent competitor, man. He would pray for the other team before the game. He would try to rip their nuts off during the game, and then he would pray for them after the game. That guy was a great competitor. But one of the great things, we would warm up occasionally with Charlie throwing the football to players running routes in the gym just to warm up, and to watch how he threw the ball so beautifully. And the other thing one time was his rookie year, he and Monty Williams were drafted together, and there was back then there was more of like rookie hazing, which is
right,
rightfully frowned upon today. So Coach Riley lined up everybody but those two in two lines, and they had to run the gauntlet, and you could hit them and when they came through. So our teams were physical back then. So Monty Williams went first, and man, he was trying to run through, but he was getting popped. So he came out staggering at the other end, right? And little Charlie, I was like, this guy's going to die. This guy came in with high knees, and they were hitting him hard. And you saw the great balance. Like, he didn't flinch. He'd been hit harder on a football field. Like it was nothing. It was one of the greatest things I'd ever seen. To that point and since that point was Charlie Ward running the gauntlet.
Jeff, I have a fan question for you. One of my really close friends, his name's Andrew Crawford. He's been a fan since he was in diapers. You guys made the run to the NBA Finals in 1998-99 as an 8th seed, and you were the first team to do so, and it was a tremendous accomplishment. We mentioned all those great players. You've seen a lot of great plays on your runs, like the Larry Johnson 4-point play. But he wanted to know if you guys had a healthy Patrick Ewing and a healthy Marcus Camby in that series against the Spurs, would it have made it easier, and do you think you guys could have won?
Well, you don't want to diminish what another team accomplished, certainly. So
no, of course not.
Like the Spurs were a great team. They were dominant that year. But I would not trade Patrick for like his greatness and his sense for giving us his best when his best was needed. I think it becomes a 7-game series, and they had home court advantage, so you probably still give them the advantage, but I do believe we would have found a way to make it a 7-game series.
And I mentioned Marcus Camby before, so naturally I have to ask you. Spurs game, believe it was 2001, the elbow incident with Danny Ferry. It's one of those iconic moments you watch on YouTube. I've seen it 1,000 times. What was it like living that? How bad did he feel immediately after the fact? How did you guys cool him down right after the fact? I mean, because you look back on it now, no disrespect to something. It's very funny to watch, but obviously you don't want any stuff like that happening in the middle of the game or any altercations like that. Unfortunately, a couple of years later, we would see the malice at the Palace. But what was it like living that? And how did you guys cool him down on the sidelines quickly after?
Well, I didn't cool him down because I was like going in the back to get stitches. So, but the bad part is I took the punch and he got suspended for 5 games, I believe. Like, I should have gotten to decide if he was suspended. Like, you can't take the hit and lose a great player like Camby. Like, that's like a double whammy. So, Danny Ferry had a history of like dirty stuff, and you try to stay poised and play through it. I thought the officials did a poor job of like not getting the teams back to their benches, letting people mill around, and obviously letting Camby get loose to take his punch at Ferry. And unfortunately, I got caught in the middle. But it is funny when you look at like me getting hit. But the funny part too is like after the game, I'm sure everybody was talking about in the locker room, man, I wish that was me. I wish I got to smack his ass, like Camby did. So yeah, I think people were signing up for the next swing. Who got to hit me next? So yeah.
Yeah, that was tremendous. This whole entire thing was tremendous. Jeff, you came on for us on short notice, and for that we are eternally grateful, and we really, really appreciate it, and we thank you so much. What we do here is usually we give our guests the last word, so if there's anything you would like to share or promote, the floor is all yours. It was an honor to have you on. You are a New York legend, especially to Nick and I, to all my friends and family. We grew up huge Knicks fans. Thank you for everything you've done. You're a tremendous broadcaster. We hope you have a very happy, healthy, and safe New Year. You and your brother Stan, the rest of your family and friends as well. So go right ahead. The floor is all yours.
Well, I thank you guys for having me on. And the only thing I'd like to say is go Knicks. Hopefully Tom and Leon can get this thing going in the direction it needs to, so they have sustained success. So that's the last thing I'll say is go Knicks.
Oh, we got Jeff. How great would a Pelicans Knicks NBA Finals be for you?
Oh my goodness, that would be nirvana right there. Yeah. So let's hope. Knock on wood. Anyway, take care, guys.
Thanks. So
Take care,
Jeff, we really appreciate it. And since my name is Nick, of course, I had to be a Knicks fan. So we appreciate you coming on. One of the all-time great Knicks coaches of all time. So that's going to do it here for this episode of You Know I'm Right. So for our very special guest, Jeff Van Gundy, and for my co-host, Joe Calabrese, I am Nick Durst, and this has been You Know I'm Right.